Good evening, councillors and members of the public, and welcome to the first meeting of the Central Area Planning Committee for the new council year. I'd like to draw your attention to the procedures in the event of the fire alarm going off this evening that are on the screen behind me. We're not anticipating a test, so if the alarm does sound, please exit by the nearest evacuation route and meet under the canopy at Waitrose. Can I remind you that we are being webcast, so please ensure that your card is pushed right into the console until you hear the click or feel the click, and that you use your microphone when speaking. The first item on the agenda is the appointment of the chairman. Is the committee happy to confirm the appointment of Councillor Jenny Else as chairman of the Central Area Planning Committee for the 2015-16 council year? Agreed. Thank you. And if Councillor Else would like to come and take the chair and continue with the agenda.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors and members of the public. Item 2 on the agenda is confirmation of the appointment of Councillor Brian Ellis as Vice Chairman of the committee. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you, Councillor Ellis. So the minutes of the meeting, which took place on the 22nd of April, have been laid on the table for the last 30 minutes. Are you content that I sign these as a correct record of that meeting? Thank you. Have there been any apologies for absence, Fiona?
Thank you, Chairman. I've had apologies from Councillors Simon Thornton and Liz Wheatley.
And have any members declared interest before the meeting?
None, Chairman.
Sorry, do members have any other non-pecuniary or disclosable pecuniary interest to declare?
Madam Chairman, I'm well acquainted with one of the members of the Frith Hill Association.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Have there been any questions received from members of the public?
None, Chairman.
And are there any updates to government guidance or legislation that the committee should be aware of?
Thank you, Chairman. There are none in relation to the items on this agenda. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And now, could we ask you, Beth, please, to introduce the quarterly enforcement report?
Thank you, Chairman. This report is to bring members up to date with the performance of the enforcement service for January to March of this year. The report is for noting. I will just briefly update the two site-specific updates on pages 6 and 7. On page 6 for cost cutter, where we said the prosecution bundle was to be sent to the council's legal service. This has now been done. And similarly with the kebab centre, the prosecution bundle has now been passed to legal services. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Beth. Members, are there any questions or remarks to Beth? None? Okay.
Can I just say that we continue to have a pretty good performance here compared with a few years ago when it was before Beth. In fact, it was in a dire system. So the numbers are slightly up, but I mean it's well within the bounds of what's reasonable. And I, for one, am very grateful for the work that the enforcement team have done. And it's shown through here. The enforcement team are responsive and really do get on with things. And I would commend this report to the committee and thank the team for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions or remarks before we move on to the recommendation? Okay, the recommendation is set out on the first page of the agenda that the enforcement report be noted. Is that agreed? Thank you. So now we move on to applications for planning permission. In the event of site inspections being necessary as a result of our consideration of the applications at this meeting, these will be held on the 13th of July 2015 at a time to be agreed. So moving on to the planning applications. The first application is WA 2015-0468, erection of 9 dwellings and ancillary works following demolition of 2 dwellings, as amplified by emails dated the 29th of April 2015 and received 29th and the 15th of May 2015, and plans received on the 15th, oh, that's twice, okay, at Foxdean and South Wall, Charterhouse Road, Godalming, GU7 2AW. William, is it William? No, it's not William, it's Peter. Would you like to introduce the application, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this application seeks permission for the construction of 9 dwellings following the demolition of 2 existing detached properties. The application site forms a curtilage of these 2 dwellings and is located on the east side of Charterhouse Road. We've got a few pictures of the site. This shows the existing property Foxdean and its neighbouring property Deep Heights, and in the distance you'll see a relatively recently approved development of a similar scheme to that now proposed. This picture here shows the frontage boundary treatment to the front of South Wall, the other property to be demolished. You'll see that there's not a clear view into the site from this angle of the existing property. And this is just a clearer view of the property, the development currently under construction, and that was for 9 dwellings, again following the demolition of existing properties along that part of the highway. These are the existing elevations and floor plans of the property Foxdean. As you can see, it's a sort of 1.5 story style property, 1960s construction. And here are the elevations of the existing property South Wall. Similarly, they're both set within the hillside, and you can see the change, sort of the 2-story almost element to the front, and then to the rear, more of a single-story property as it's built into the hillside. So what we've got proposed is the 9 dwellings. They're in 3 blocks of 3 dwellings. They're sort of 3.5 stories in height. This shows plots 1 to 3. You'll notice that the left-hand side, as you look at it, is a reduced eaves level. Reduced ridge height, increasing as it moves into the centre. These are the central 3. Plots 4 to 6, and this is plots 7 to 9, which is sort of the other end of the block, and again the ridge height reducing down to the side. This is a street scene elevation that's been provided by the applicants in support of the proposal. You'll see it in comparison with the neighbouring properties. I mean, there's some, and it indicates the wooded area behind. Obviously, this is their interpretation and their submissions in support, but it gives a good indication of the heights and in comparisons with the neighbouring buildings. This also shows relationship of the neighbouring properties. This, firstly, the Deep Heights. The dark dotted line shows the outline of the neighbouring property, and then behind the outline of the proposed dwellings. And a similar plan for the other end of the site with the neighbouring property. Again, the dotted line shows existing built form on the neighbouring site and the proposed dwellings. This plan shows the 23 car parking spaces and how they're provided on site. Appreciate that the numbers are quite small, but individually they're numbered to provide 23 parking spaces. So moving on to the determining issues, the principal development is considered to be acceptable. The site is within the developed area of Godalming, and therefore we're looking at other material matters which should be taken into account. In terms of the technical internal space standards, the scheme meets and exceeds the requirements of those, the guidance set out by government. As for parking and highways, our parking guidelines set out the requirements for dwellings of these size, and the parking provision made is considered to be acceptable, with 23 parking spaces provided. Waste storage, this is a matter which we feel is acceptable to be secured by condition. Formal details have not been provided as part of the application, but there is a condition attached to the recommendation that secures this. As with air quality, we have had response from environmental health officers where they have concern that the impact of development might impact on air quality, but they feel this can be satisfactorily covered by condition, and again they're listed in the conditions within the recommendation. The impact on preserved trees, there are preserved trees on the site and there's ancient woodland to the rear. The council's tree officer has looked at this and considers the impact on ancient woodland and preserved trees to be acceptable, subject to protection measures, and again that is secured by condition for the officers or council to agree specific details of protection during construction and beyond. Sorry. As for infrastructure contributions, I have an update to make on that, so I shall make that at the end, and I'll pick up on that point there. The effect on the Wealdon Heath Special Protection Area has been considered. Given the location of the development, proximity and scale to the Special Protection Area, we don't believe there will be any likely significant impact on that area, and therefore we've concluded on that basis that the amenity spaces within the town sufficiently provide suitable alternative areas for future residents to visit. In terms of the matters of judgment, moving on to amenity and play space, no formal play space is provided on site, although we wouldn't necessarily seek that for a development of this scale. As for external amenity space, so private rear gardens, they are modest for the size of the dwellings proposed, but given the site's location, town centre, we feel that there is adequate provision. The visual impact of the scheme, the dwellings are separated into 3 blocks as presented earlier. They're terrace dwellings. The blocks allow for a visual gap between the dwellings, alleviating the impact of bulk, scale and massing on the character of the area. The design, we feel, is responsive to the surrounding vernacular and reflects the scale of the previously consented scheme further along Charterhouse Road, which I showed a picture of earlier. The reduced eaves height to the end dwellings would also integrate the proposed dwellings with the surrounding neighbouring properties, and the neighbouring properties are 2-storey in height, so that they seek to sort of address this with that reduction on the end properties, but we do accept that they are higher. As for the sort of impact on the wider area, this is located within an area identified as the Godalming hillside, which is protected in terms of its woodland backdrop that it provides to the town, and the Frith Hill area of special environmental quality, which relates specifically to this area. The impact on that is considered to be acceptable because the wooded backdrop to the site will be retained and protected, subject to appropriate conditions being attached. And new planting can be secured by way of a landscaping condition to the front of the site to reduce the initial impact there. As for the impact on neighbouring amenity, it's considered to be acceptable given the existing hard boundary screening, local topography and the scale of the properties. A condition is also recommended to ensure that side-facing windows of the end properties are restricted to be obscure glaze to prevent any direct overlooking. I've picked up on the Wealdon Heath matter. So I'll just move to the update I have on the application. Sorry, I haven't actually got my update sheet. It seems to be gone. Okay, sorry, Chairman. Thank you. We have. I'll move you to page 37 of your agenda, where we've got listed various contributions being sought. We've gone back to the service providers or relevant officers seeking these contributions, and we have to ensure that the relevant contributions we're seeking meet the requirements and tests of recent government changes in securing such contributions. And we've actually had to amend that list, and now we're only seeking contributions towards education and towards environmental improvements. And this is proposed to be secured by way of a Section 106 agreement. The further updates we have is additional representations. We have 5 additional letters of objection. Their points are listed within the update sheet, and in terms of the comments that we feel, they're currently addressed within the officer's report. Okay. The further update to the report is additional plan has been supplied by the agent, just confirming that the number of parking spaces is 23. Their initial submission was not clear on that, and they stated 22, but the actual plan submitted shows 23, and officers therefore are satisfied on that basis. We have an amendment to condition 5, which is on page 43 of your agenda. This should read as follows: the first and second floor windows on the northwestern and southeastern elevations of the dwellings, hereby permitted, shall be glazed with obscure glazing to the extent that intervisibility is excluded, fixed shut, and shall be retained. That picks up on the overlooking issue. So I've got a revised recommendation. Pardon? Okay. So I've just got an additional verbal update here. The figure of 13,050 on page 39 under the paragraph headed financial consideration should read 10,150. Thank you. So I'll move to the revised recommendation, and that is subject to the completion of a suitable legal agreement in respect to the planning infrastructure contributions by the 10th of July 2015, and subject to the agreement on those additional verbal updates in terms of contributions or revived infrastructure contributions, that permission be granted subject to revised condition 5 above and the remaining conditions set out on page 42 to 47 of the agenda. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Peter. So this item is subject to public speaking. I believe that the procedure has been explained to you, whoever is speaking. So please can I invite the objector, Lisa Dimbilow, to speak. Good evening, Miss Dimbilow. You have 3 minutes from when you start speaking.
Thank you. I'm afraid I'm going to object to every single point you've just made there. This development does not comply with the Godalming hillside area policy because it would diminish the wooded appearance of the hillside to the detriment of the character and siting of the town. The tall and bulky frontage close to Charterhouse Road would obliterate the tree-lined slopes in the area of special environmental quality, which define this important gateway into our beautiful town. This is not conserving our woodland asset in an appropriate manner so that it can be enjoyed for its contribution to the quality of life for this and future generations. It is not sustainable. The most desperate need in Godalming is for small and low-cost homes, far more so than for large, expensive houses. This scheme has no mix of house type and does not comply with policy H4. The current Surrey Advertiser headline, "Less than half of affordable housing built," emphasises the urgent need for smaller houses. Continuing to build big houses is not sustainable, and as a result, permission cannot be presumed. The NPPF requires good design. Good design is a key aspect of sustainable development. NPPF 64 states that permission should be refused for development of poor design. This scheme is a poor design. Parking is assumed in garages, But there is not enough room for more than 13 parking spaces on the driveway area, and garages are not used for regular parking. So this will put pressure on these external parking spaces. This is totally inadequate and will lead to parking on a busy main road, local streets, and break Surrey Highway's condition for approval. Modern society demands that kitchen dining spaces are the biggest living areas and the hub of the household. Here, these are underground and look out onto a small courtyard with a bridge cutting out the sun and daylight. In this bunker-like kitchen diner, the daylighting is only 1/4 of the adequate level reported in the daylighting report. It's totally unacceptable. It's very poor design, and poor design is not sustainable, and permission cannot be presumed. The access stairs to the front doors are also poorly designed and don't comply with building regs because they're too steep and potentially dangerous, apart from looking completely wrong. The architecture is poor and out of scale with the neighbouring houses, with these tall terraces destroying the street scene and creating precedent to build a complete wall of building. Today there are 34 objections to this scheme, outnumbering supporters, and I urge you to refuse permission, but if you are at all unsure, to have a site visit and come and see for yourself. Godalming does not deserve such destruction of the town's character. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Imbilo. And now, please can we hear from the agent, Douglas Bond? I'm going to ask the public gallery to remain silent, please, through this meeting. Thank you. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Bond.
Members, thank you. Before submitting this application, the applicant consulted widely with the local community. This included discussions with individual residents. Amendments were made to the scheme in response to those points raised. I'm pleased to note that 31 letters of support have been received for this application. Even the Town Council and all statutory consultees have raised no objections either to the scheme. The application has also been informed by pre-application discussions with officers. In light of those discussions, the proposals were amended. In particular, the height and bulk of the buildings have been reduced and their relationships with neighbouring residential properties improved. Secondly, the scheme now annexes the ancient woodland at the rear that characterises the higher slopes of the site. This has significant benefits in preserving and enhancing this important local characteristic, meeting the objectives of area-specific local plan policies, including the Godalming Hillside Area Policy, as well as the views expressed by your tree officer at the pre-application stage. The proposed buildings, by reason of the scale and design, represent high-quality replacements, very much consistent with other forms of development in the immediate locality. The 4-bedroom houses meets an identified need in the council's schma. It's a form of development in character with this area and one that is supported by many local residents. It's important to reconfirm that the council's car parking standards have been met in full. The scale and design of the end buildings, as you've heard from your officer, have been adapted to ensure that neighbouring residential amenities in relation to overlooking and scale have been properly considered and preserved. The proposal accords with the local plan policies that apply generally and to this area particularly. Consistent with the Frith Hill area special environmental quality, maximum tree cover has been maintained. Existing residential amenities have been retained. Development is confined to the road frontage and is not in depth, nor is it above the prevailing heights of the trees. Consistent with the Godalming Hillside policy, the proposal will not diminish the wooded appearance of the hillside and will not result in a loss of tree cover to the detriment of the area and the character of the town. As noted, the preservation and enhancement of the ancient woodland at the rear will more than meet the requirements of this policy. Overall, the scheme represents a development of significant merit, is policy compliant and consistent with both local and national planning policy. The officer recommendation for approval reinforces this. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Bond. Members, your comments and questions, if you please. Councillor Holder.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have to say I'm slightly confused about this amendment to condition 5, because it seems to me that the windows are facing the southeastern elevation, which in fact look onto the road, don't seem to be overlooking anybody's property, and I can't understand why they should be glazed. I would have thought it's essential that any windows overlooking your drive and overlooking the road should not be glazed. So can somebody explain why it is?
Thank you, Chairman. No, it is the windows in the side elevations. I appreciate the confusion with the orientation, but the windows which we are referring to are the ones that Peter, my able assistant, is pointing out on screen now. If members think that they need to be tightened up so it's more explicit which windows we're referring to, we can tighten that condition up, but it's those windows to which this condition would bite.
Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'm the ward councillor for the Charterhouse area, and I've had a number of emails on this subject, as I think most of my colleagues have. Interestingly enough, I've actually had more emails in support of this scheme than those against, but a lot of the people who are in support of it don't seem to live in Charterhouse, although they do live in Godalming. But that's a by-the-by. I very much supported the previous scheme, i.e. the scheme that, not the previous scheme, but the scheme that was at Bartco and Nantmore, which came to us probably 2 or 3 years ago. But the main reason I supported that scheme is because we had lost an application to build a big set of flats on that scheme. We went to appeal twice. We were successful the first time, but the second time, sadly, we were unsuccessful. And so we had a choice really between 9 houses that we see now or a big block of flats. And I know that residents at the time and councillors were very much in favour of this scheme, that scheme, as opposed to flats, which is why I supported it. And I don't dislike it, but what I don't like about this current scheme is the fact that it's too similar to this scheme. In fact, I've got a number of concerns. I mean, my primary concern is, in fact, that it doesn't address the real housing need in Godalming. It's again another set of 9 4-bedroom houses, and I would have liked to have seen more variety of housing options on this site if it's going to be developed. But the other thing I don't like is the similarity with the other scheme, and I'd like to have seen something which is not the same pastiche. It's a bit different, it looks quite nice, and equally something that doesn't degrade the greenery that exists at present. This is very much going to be a mirror image of the previous scheme, and I think it's going to be a bit of a loss of visual amenity going up Charterhouse Road. All that said, I don't think the site is a site that shouldn't be looked at for development. It's sort of in some ways a least worst option because there's plenty of other sites that we'd much prefer to keep as green open space. This is a site that does have existing houses, and existing houses that perhaps don't have a great deal of character or visual attractiveness. But on this particular scheme, I'm a bit torn. I don't think potentially this council could actually say no, because I think we would be unsuccessful on appeal. But personally, I don't think this is the right scheme for that site at the moment. But I will listen to my fellow colleagues and make my decision at the end of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ellis, Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. I have to be honest, I was the one that asked for the amendment to condition 5. If I look at the block plan on page 19, there doesn't appear to be a great deal of difference in the distance between Deep Height and blocks 1 to 3 and Tyndall to the southeast and blocks 7 to 9. And so it did seem to me appropriate that a condition to protect, shall we say, the amenity and privacy of Deep Height should be equally applied to the house to the southeast. Perhaps members may not have noticed, in fact, but I think on pages 18 and 19, halfway down page 18, proposed elevations of plots 4 to 6, I think, should actually be 7 to 9, and I think on page 19, proposed elevations of plots 7 to 9 should actually be 4 to 6. But given that there has already been a development elsewhere in Charterhouse Road similar to this application, I can see really no reason at all for opposing it. And like other members, I too have had a great many emails from members of the public supporting the scheme, and I can't see any reason for not doing so. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Thank you. Could I... there's no floor plan of these buildings included in our papers. Is that something which you can show us?
Would you like to, because they're all on separate plans, we only have hard copies which we can show up, we haven't got them on screen.
Okay, I mean, normally we have floor plans. There was an objection to the space. I'm just wondering whether that has, whether that's something which concerns us in terms of the dining and the area which is with lack of sunlight and so on and so forth. Is that something which you could at least talk to if you can't show us the detail?
So this is the floor plan of the first floor with the bedroom and the kitchen dining area, and this is a cross section showing that is a floor we're referring to. That is the best.
Councillor Martin.
I mean, we don't have the dimensions on that, or it's not very clear as to the dimensions, but it does look pretty small to me, and it's the kitchen dining area is tucked into the back and is not subject to much in the way of light. Would that be a fair comment, would you say?
If we were to take as guidance the government's new prescribed space standards, this would be acceptable. This would meet the new government standards. Although those government standards aren't local plan policy and don't carry the same weight as if they were local plan policy, they do meet those guideline standards.
Thank you. My own view on this, and I like other members of the committee, I've had a considerable number of emails and indeed one or two calls. I would naturally, I think probably along with many members of the committee, prefer to have a smaller number of houses and the whole bulk of the thing down from what it is. But of course we are faced with the application that's in front of us, and we don't have the luxury of trimming and changing it. We either have to agree or not agree. And I think for me it would be very difficult to disagree with a proposal of this sort when it's alongside another proposal which is not dissimilar, for which approval has been given. I've got concerns about the impact on the trees, and I understand that, but our tree expert has had a look at this and decided that it's acceptable from his or her point of view, and it would be very difficult for us to disagree with the tree and landscape officer, although I have to say the diagram that was shown, which is from the agents or from the architects, you wonder whether that is really representational of the real thing. So I've got some concerns, I have to say, but I think it will be very difficult for us to turn down this particular proposal when the one alongside has been given, although I understand again it would be nice to have something which was very different. We are faced with the application in front of us, and I think it's marginal for me, but I will go with the officers and I will support the application.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chairman. Excuse me. When I first saw this particular application, bearing in mind that excuse me, 9 dwellings are being squeezed into the same space that previously there were 2 dwellings, one cannot help but feel that this is really overdevelopment. So didn't feel very happy about that at all. And bearing in mind that I've lived in Godalming proper for 26 years, and throughout that time we've seen Charterhouse Road remain pretty well the same, and particularly on that side of the road. So therefore the previous development that's just taken place only has an element of the same character, in the sense that they are large properties, because on that side they're all large properties in large spaces. So now we're getting down to large properties but in small spaces, and I don't think that's particularly good for society in general, or us in particular. It's already been alluded to the fact that all of us have received much information over these last few days, and either for or against the officer's recommendation. Now, if I take first of all the Bellwood Properties publication, then I think from comments already raised this evening, we have an unrealistic picture of what we are likely to find in reality on that front page. And therefore I would certainly very much value us having the opportunity to go out there ourselves and see things in 3D and make our own judgment on whether this is realistic or not. It's not realistic because it seems to me you would sort of view this as a plain ground, and you've got large trees in the background and medium trees in the middle ground, and that isn't the case. Now, the other thing about it is that under local consultation, Bellwood Properties are overwhelmingly saying that the feedback received favoured this scheme, with 68% of respondees opting for the 9-unit scheme and just 16% indicating a preference for the 16-unit scheme. When I see something like that, I immediately say, why should I believe it? There's no supporting evidence whatsoever. There's not even a figure as to how many people were approached, let alone how many people responded. And when we're using percentages like that, depending on the size of the response, it's meaningful or it's not meaningful. So the only thing that gave that a little bit of credibility were these 5 emails we've received in the last 3 days. 2 of them I've dismissed because they're from residents in Farncombe. The only things that gave me a little bit of hope were the ones that actually came from people living in Charterhouse Road. But that really is only 3 of them that I can be reasonably sure about. And when I say that, when I was trying to trace down these people in the telephone directory, they're all ex-directory, which is quite interesting. And of course I don't have the ward listing either, so I can't take it any further. I was just wondering whether Councillor Reynolds, because Councillor Gordon-Smith isn't here tonight, is he, whether they knew of these names and whether they were genuine names or not. No, perhaps not. Now then, it's already been alluded to parking. The councillors who have been here before are familiar with my going on about parking. We have 9 4-bedroomed houses there. In my view, sort of a minimum occupation would be 3 persons per dwelling. So that's 27. And I would say, in this day and age, that's a sort of minimum of 27 vehicles. So already we have an undercapacity in terms of being able to park. And we know there is no legislation that says what size of vehicle we can purchase. Part of it's a status symbol, so people who can afford it or have the benefits will go for larger vehicles. And we go to the garage itself, and I'm familiar with a garage being 2.4 metres wide, and that is indeed what these are. And not being a very rich person, I'm able to park my Jazz in there. But how many, you know, open the door comfortably and get out? But what about all our off-roaders or 4x4s and things? As I say, nobody's saying how many vehicles a family can have or what size they are. So I believe we're heading for deep trouble in the future with this sort of situation. Now, we do have to live within certain constraints, as we've already learnt about. And I think the points that were made about good design are extremely valid. And just because while I was living in Godalming, I lived in a similar setting, so therefore there was the walled garden and there was lots of trees up on a steep slope. And now that I'm living not quite in the open air, I do have glass in the sides of the building, but now the contrast in light levels is absolutely amazing and much to be preferred. So again, I would strongly endorse that this doesn't represent particularly good design. It's somewhere where somebody can live, but if you're paying 500,000 tops, then surely you need something better than is being offered here. And yes, I think the fact that we cannot consider, for example, the access stairs, because they're not, even though they're not building regulations compliant, I would sort of say going forwards, I'd like to see a linking of building regulations with planning so that things can be prepared properly in the first instance and we don't have to go through any retrospective action. So, Chairman, councillors, those are my feelings at the moment. Not very happy, but I will also gladly listen to other councillors' opinions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor James.
Thank you. If members were minded to go with the officer's recommendation, if you could just look on page 46, the condition 17, as everybody's concerned about cars and garages, it doesn't actually say that the garage has to be used for the parking of a vehicle, so it could be turned, presumably with permitted development rights, into a ping-pong room or a billiard room, and then there would only be one parking space. So if it could be, it does say thereafter the parking and turning areas shall be retained, but if you could just add in the word "and garage," shall be retained. I did talk to officers yesterday, so I had hoped it'd been on the amended bit, just so it protects the garage for the parking of a vehicle if they have to have two places. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just to confirm, we can add that, and that strengthens that condition and secures the retention of the garage. Thank you.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chairman. I think one of the biggest factors that we have to put some weight to, and I'd be grateful if officers could give us a steer as to sort of how much weight we should be putting onto it, is indeed the site 3 doors up at Borough and Nantmore, and we've heard a little bit about that, on the grounds that we have it's being built, it's been approved, flats went to appeal. And we have the application site, the development there. I'd be interested to know from officers, to give us an idea of perspective, how this site compares in size, approximately, to Borough and Nantmore, and indeed the number of dwellings that are being proposed here, and how that compares to Borough and Nantmore, because I think it's quite important for us to have an idea, not just for perspective, but for the precedent that's already been set in the road, because it's very difficult if we were to object on the grounds that this is overdevelopment or out of keeping or anything like that, on the grounds that only 100 yards up the road we have a very similar development, if indeed that is very similar. And I'd be interested to hear from officers on both the scale, the size, and how much weight we perhaps should be given to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, Madam Chairman. I shan't make that mistake again. The weight to be attached to the scheme further up the road is not insignificant. Whilst there's we speak constantly of there being no such thing as a precedent, there is when you are assessing the same conditions with the same policies. If we consider that the scheme 3 doors up didn't have an impact on the woodland and it's similar to this scheme, which it is, it would be difficult to arrive at a different conclusion. So my advice would be that we should give not an insignificant amount of weight to the Barco and Nantmore scheme. Peter will just talk through the differences between both the scheme to the north and this one.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I mean, the scheme to the north was the same as an erection of nine dwellings following demolition of existing dwellings. I'll give you some context of the site. The site, the Barco and Nantmore site, was 0.27 hectares in size, whereas the proposed site is 0.36 hectares, so it is a larger site than the neighbouring one. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Councillor Martin, if you want to come back on that point.
If I could very quickly, could officers please remind me if the Barco and Nantmore site is effectively 3 buildings in the same way that this is, or were the 9 dwellings spread across 2 buildings on that?
So I just realised I'm showing you a plan, but we have a photograph of it, but we have to do it with the plan. So that is... So that was the location plan.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'll just come back. Barry showed you the location plan, and just in response to your question, there's 2 dwellings on site which were replaced by 9 dwellings, which is the same as that proposed now before us. So I think that was the answer to the question.
Thank you. Councillor Hunter.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I, like Councillor Lee, I'm concerned about the size of the garages. I took time and looked at some measurements of motor vehicles. A Land Rover is just on 2.2 meters wide. A Jaguar is just on 2.1 meters wide, and a Ford Fiesta is just under 2.1 meters wide. So I think these garages are not fit for purpose, and they will not be used. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just as I felt that was useless, then so I think the illustration was useless, and that is much more like so dominant that we actually see and feel in practice. So hence me sort of thinking about a site visit, before we can come to a conclusion, because we don't want to be making judgments on what we've seen in the illustrations. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more comments? Or yes, Councillor Upton.
Madam Chairman, I agree with the site visit. I feel that I've travelled up and down that road many times, and to get the feeling of this new development in tandem with the one that we see on the screen at the moment would benefit from a site visit to clarify our minds as to what its overall projection into the area would be like. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more comments? Councillor Martin.
Thank you. I go up and down this road almost every day, so I'm fairly familiar with the site, and I would not support a further site visit. I think that the existing housing in the photograph there does look different to the plans as shown, but of course that's it at its maximum brashness when it's just being built before any additional trees have grown and so on and so forth. So I think it is at its worst point from the point of view of presentation of the scheme. I just think that we have to give considerable weight to that scheme when we consider the scheme that we are now looking at. And I think to turn the one down when this has been passed and approved would be perverse, and I think would be putting the council onto very weak ground. I've got reservations about the proposal we've seen before us, but I do think that it is acceptable, and indeed the statutory consultees have also found no objection, and we have a very mixed position from residents of those who support and those who are against. So there's a big judgment call. But I have to say I give considerable weight to that application, and I think that we should be right to approve it in line with the officer's recommendation.
Members, do you have any other comments? So I think we need to decide whether there's any support for a site visit. Can we have a show of hands, please? Who would support a site visit to this?
Only 3.
Yeah. Show of hands, please, for those against.
5 against.
Thank you. So it's been suggested that in... Am I right? Condition 17. Yeah. Condition 17. It's been suggested, I think it was Councillor James who suggested that that should include wording to say cars must be parked in garage. To include the yes. But,
Thank you. It just should say thereafter the parking, garages and turning areas shall be retained and maintained for their designated purposes. So it's just after the word parking, dot garages and turning areas. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for that? Yes, Councillor Martin.
Happy to second.
You're happy to second, thank you. Councillor Holder.
And to go back, Madam Chairman, to my point on condition 5, as I know the Vice Chairman is in, I think it's easier to say northwestern and side elevations rather than northwestern and southeastern elevations.
Do you need to say something? Yes.
Chairman, I just think to be consistent, because the northwestern is the other side elevation, perhaps it should say northwestern and southeastern side elevations to capture it all. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Reynolds. I think then that we need to move on to the revised recommendation. So the revised recommendation, as set out on the update report, is that subject to the completion of a suitable legal agreement in respect of planning infrastructure contributions by the 10th of July 2015, permission be granted subject to conditions 1 to 4, condition 5 to include the word side elevation, and 6 to 19, which includes condition 17, to include the word garage after parking and before turning areas. That it? Are we agreed? Councillor Martin.
Show of hands.
A show of hands, thank you. Can we have a show of hands then, please, for those who agree with those?
This is in favour of the recommendation to grant approval. Is your hand up, Councillor Holder? Sorry, yes. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Sorry.
5.
Yes.
In favour.
And those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 7 against.
Thank you, members. Then the application is refused. I'm sure you're very pleased, but if we could have some decorum, it would be appreciated. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we have to find a reason for refusal. So, somebody to propose the refusal. Councillor Lee.
Sorry, Chairman, what did you...
We need somebody to propose the refusal.
I'd like to propose the refusal.
With your reason?
To be developed. No. It is on the basis of a change to the local character, in spite of the Carla homes being there. And although the guidelines are met, inadequate parking spaces and garaging. If that's...
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Reynolds wants to add something.
Well, I don't think I can support that, because I don't think that's a reasonable ground for refusal. I mean, my primary objective and problem was that it's not really addressing the real housing need in Godalming and doesn't offer a variety of mix of housing type and size, which is contrary to one of our plans. You know, we have a biggest demand for 2 and 3 bedroom houses, and this obviously doesn't include any of them. Now, I know that was not the case with Barco Namor, but in a sense we've met our obligation to provide 4 bedroom and 5 bedroom houses in Charter House with that development. So this is why I think there could be grounds that on this site we should be looking for a more suitable mix of housing for the need that exists in Godalming. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Are we there, do you think?
Well, Chairman, we've got 3 suggested reasons for refusal. If I could just perhaps offer members some comment. If you agree that you feel this is unacceptable in visual terms, perhaps we could have a little bit more about how you think it does harm the visual character of the street scene. I think that will be helpful to articulate that slightly more fully. I didn't come to the conclusion there was a consensus on the inadequate parking reason. I think perhaps members may need to vote on that reason. My comment on that is that as we presented in our report, the scheme does actually comply with your very recently adopted guidelines, which of course are more demanding than the County Council's own standards in respect of parking. And in terms of the space provided, I understand they also comply with the recommended guidelines. So I would advise against including a reason for refusal on the basis of inadequate parking provision, because the scheme does meet your, as I say, your very recently adopted demanding guidelines. Thereafter, the housing mix reason, I think, would be defensible. Thank you, Chairman.
Just to add, the legal agreement hasn't yet been completed, so that's another reason, failure to secure the contributions.
Councillor Lee.
Recognising the constraints under which we are operating, I withdraw that aspect about the parking, but I'll leave it as an observation for us to consider for future and changes.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds.
I think the only other one that I don't know if I pointed out, but is the lack of amenity to residents in that, because that kitchen dining room, which will be the principal living room in many cases, is going to be very devoid of light. And I think that is not an ideal thing. I mean, I don't get too precious about this, because if you buy that house, you buy it as it exists. But I certainly think that the design of it probably isn't brilliant, because it's not an ideal principal reception room, which is what it would end up being because of the lack of light.
Thank you. So, help me, Elizabeth.
So, Chairman, if perhaps members could offer some suggestions about how the scheme would harm the visual character of the street scene. For example, is it by virtue of its design? Is it by virtue of its bulk massing? The number of dwellings on the site and the impact on the open character of the site. I think rather than just say it would change the local character, you do need to make that reason slightly fuller, please. Thank you.
Councillor Reynolds.
I mean, in a sense, it will impact on the open nature of the site, and principally because of the development of Barco and Nantmore. I know it's one of these difficult things, because that was allowed, but equally, as I said before, that was sort of allowed because it was the least worst option of the only two we were presented with. But because of that, it has made the site much less open than it was before, much less green. And of course, this sort of mirror application, just sort of 2-3 doors away, is going to exacerbate that situation markedly. So I don't know if that is very helpful. I mean, I don't think the mass and bulking that's a difficult one, because it is no different to the others, and I don't think we could necessarily sustain that one. But certainly in terms of the general openness and the greenness of the hillsides, and we do have hillside policies, so I'd like to think we could probably try and bring those into force a little bit, hopefully.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we've got enough on that particular reason. And we would be able to devise a reason in relation to the proposal would provide inadequate standard of amenity for prospective residents in terms of access of daylight to the properties to reflect that reason. And the other reason in relation to mix would be the proposal fails to meet the Council's local plan policy H4 in relation to housing mix, and the recommendations in the SHMAR in relation to meeting local housing need. So I think we've got enough there. Thank you.
So can I just clarify, Elizabeth? I think we've got 4 reasons for refusal there, including the legal agreements. So there's the housing mix, visual unacceptability due to the impact on openness of site and greenness of the hillside, lack of amenity for future residents due to the design, and legal agreement not completed. Those are the proposed reasons for refusal, which you should now vote on.
Thank you, Fiona. So, can we have a show of hands, please? Those who support that.
Seven in support of refusal on those grounds.
And those against, please.
5 against.
Thank you, members. The application is refused. All right. Moving on to the next application. Item B1, WA 2015. Application Item B1, WA 2015-0667, change of use of post office.
Sorry, Chairman, could we perhaps wait until the public gallery has been vacated, because it's quite noisy.
Sorry about that. Item B1, WA 2015-0667, change of use of post office, Class A1, to 1 residential dwelling, Class C3, revision of WA 2015-0195 at Elstead Post Office and Newsagents, Thursley Road, Elstead, GU8 6DW. Peter, would you like to introduce the application, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this application seeks permission for the change of use of the existing post office and newsagents to a C3 residential use to form part of the existing residential accommodation within the building. You'll see from the location plan on screen, the site's located at the west side of the Thursley Road in Elstead, and is predominantly within a residential area of residential properties to both sides and fronting the street opposite as well. The plans on screen show the existing ground floor plan of the site. You'll see the shop here, main shop window entrance, and the post office, which is to be removed, or sorry, to be relocated to the Spar store elsewhere in the village. Here's the proposed ground floor plan. What's proposed is to keep the shop front at this stage. All that's happening is removing the existing adverts on the front of the building, but the shop front's retained on both sides and the bay window remains as existing. So what will happen, the post office area will be transformed to a proposed bedroom, and the retail element is to be a reception room, and the rear store as well as a reception room. So there's minor external changes and minor internal changes as well. The first floor plans stays as existing. It's currently used by the occupiers as their home. There's a picture of the front elevation of the shop. As I said, this advertising will be removed, but the existing shop front will be retained. You note the sort of hard standing to the front of the site. There's no proposed changing to the layout or the means of enclosure, and there's access down to the side, which leads to a garage to the rear. So in terms of determining issues, the site's within the rural settlement of Elstead. The proposal is acceptable in principle. It's conversion of an existing building. In terms of the policy position, policy S2 of the local plan seeks to protect local shops within our villages. This requires that all reasonable steps be taken to market a premises when you're looking for change of use. That any change of use will not harm the character of the area, and traffic generation can be and parking can be satisfactorily accommodated. Additional to that policy is that the loss of any shop or local service must not harm provision within the village. So in terms of marketing, the site was marketed from May 2012 to May 2013, and that included the post office. The post office has now, or is to be relocated to the Spa store, which is elsewhere in the village, so that no longer forms part of the offer of that unit. The application submissions demonstrate that existing business is no longer viable. We've had it assessed by the council's estates and valuations manager, and he's come to the conclusion with the loss of the post office and also the paper delivery service, which has been provided elsewhere, has resulted in the business being unviable, and at present the accounts details that have been provided demonstrate the existing uses being run at a deficit. So in terms of that basis, we consider additional marketing, whilst it was done 2012 to 2013, would be unsuccessful of a viable business. The parish council have raised objection on this basis. They believe that whilst the current business in there may be unviable, that potential other future uses or commercial uses could be successful. Our internal advice from the Estates Officer didn't really support that position. In terms of the impact on the village, the Spa store, which is existing, offers a wider range of goods than the existing newsagents. It also will host the post office, so that should ensure its long-term viability and retention. So therefore, while the loss of a village shop is regrettable, and recent marketing has not taken place, given that there's an alternative store with a wider range of goods and offer within the village, and that should be maintained, the loss is not considered to unacceptably harm the local community, and therefore the application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions on page, or the condition on page 61 of your agenda. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. As ward member, if I just begin, if I could, by saying that I'm of two minds with this. I know our parish council has objected, and I know why. Elstead seems to be losing commercial opportunities. I won't use the word wholesale, but it does come to mind. It does seem to be slowly losing our commercial premises, which is very sad. And so I felt that I would be very interested to hear what your thoughts and feelings on this would be. I have every sympathy with the applicants. I think they have marketed their property appropriately, but then again, we do have an awful lot of older people whose amenity will be affected hugely. They will not be able to walk to the spa from the end of the village where this property is, and so they will be disadvantaged. So I'm just interested to hear if there could be a debate in what your thoughts are. Thank you very much. Councillor Martin.
Thank you. I think, albeit what you've just said, I think if this was the last remaining shop in the village, the last remaining newsagents, I think this would be an entirely different matter. But within the village itself, there is no effective loss of service. The post office remains. There's still a newsagent. By way of comparison, in my own ward, albeit that we are within Godalming, there are no business unit. Well, there are no shops at all. There is one single business unit, which is simply an office. So I appreciate that people do have to walk, or it can be difficult, but it's not impossible. And there are many areas who have a far worse position than perhaps is here. I think that perhaps, in my mind, the most important aspect is that actually this building looks like a home. We're not looking at something that is obviously a shop. This was obviously a home before. I can't imagine that this was built as a post office. It was a home. It was converted to a shop and post office some time ago, and we are reverting back to what it once was. So I'm entirely comfortable, really, with what's being proposed here, and I would support the officer's recommendations. One perhaps flippant note: is the post box going to remain in what will effectively become the front garden of this property? Because it will look quite odd But that's certainly no reason to refuse this application.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, normally I'm resolutely opposed to change of use which takes away a commercial premise, and that's my general principle. However, if you look on page 53, we find that in 1987 there was a change of use from our front room lounge to a sub-post office, and that says it all. Less than 30 years ago, it was a house. It looks like a house. It's going back to being a house. I think it would be extraordinarily unreasonable and perverse to not support the application, especially as it's proven very difficult to rent it as a retail unit. And I'm not surprised it's too small, and I would have thought it would be unviable. So I think it's an entirely reasonable request, and I'll be supporting it.
Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you. Well, until about 9 months ago, I'd have had to declare an interest because I used to deliver my newspapers, but they stopped doing that. And it's very close to where I live. But the bottom line is, obviously, they're not getting enough support from people at that end of the village to make it a viable business. And I think that sadly says it all. It obviously can't continue as a news agent, and I think the people who use it at the moment, it's only as a news agent. If it suddenly turns into a plumbing business or something completely different, it's not going to help anybody in Elstead unless you want to get some plumbing part. And then there's a lack of parking, and parking does cause some issues Sunday mornings and times like that, because people park obviously on the road. You know, as Councillor Tom Martin said, there is a co-op. Well, not co-op, but there's a spa store, so let's support that. If it's going to be even more chance of that succeeding, which I think it does, but with a post office and a newsagent, then that's great. There is a newsagent delivery service provided in the village, so if those who can't walk to the spa to get their newspapers do have an option of getting a newspaper delivered, albeit at a small cost. So I can't disagree with the officers, you know, sadly. This is the way things sort of work, so I'll go with the officers.
Thank you. Councillor Hunter. Councillor Holder.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think Hunter and Holder are probably being confused. Like both Councillor Martin Senior and Councillor Martin Junior, I endorse this application. I've visited the spa shops on many occasions, and there hasn't been a time when there hasn't been at least 6 people in it. It's a very thriving village community, and I think that by taking the post office into the spa shop would be a move in the right direction, so I fully support this officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to say anything? Well, thank you for that. I understand and agree in many ways with everything that's been said. I do feel, however, that it is a great shame to see our shops disappearing in our villages, and so I'm grateful that we have had the opportunity to have a closer look at this, and I'm sure that the people in Elstead will appreciate how difficult it is for the applicant. So thank you very much. I think now the recommendation is that permission be granted, subject to one condition and one informative set out on page 61 of the agenda. May I have those in favour of the recommendation to grant, please?
11 in favour.
I'm going to abstain.
And 1 abstention.
Thank you, members. Permission is granted. Moving on to the last application, item B2 WA 2015-0558, erection of side and rear extensions and garage following the demolition of the existing garage and extensions, revision of WA 2015-0218 at 21 Overbrook, Godalming, GU7 1LX. Peter, would you like to introduce the application, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this seeks permission for various extensions and alterations to the existing property. The property is located at the end of Overbrook. This is the settlement boundary to the north. You can see the green in the top corner of the location plan, but the site is within the developed area of Godalming. So what's proposed is the demolition of an existing prefabricated garage, replacement with an attached garage, a 2-storey side extension, and a single-storey rear extension, which in part replaces an existing conservatory. There's a photo of the existing elevation, and the property in question is this one in the bottom left-hand corner, and the two-storey side extension is proposed in this location here. There's a couple of photos, another photo. This is a view of properties which back onto the site. They are orientated away, but they are on higher land in terms of their positioning. And this is the rear elevation of the existing property, the conservatory. You can see an outline here of an existing lean-to which has recently been removed. And you can just see the corner there of an existing flat-roof dormer in the back elevation of the property. So what's proposed is the two-storey side extension. It is angled, so on a flat plan it doesn't look immediately sort of natural addition, but that's because it's sloped to follow the line of the boundary, which is as an angle as it extends away into the rear garden. So the two-storey extension set down from the existing ridge height. It's set well back from the front elevation of the property, and on that basis we don't think it's a prominent addition to the property or a prominent addition in the street scene. Here's the rear elevation. You can see the proposed single-storey extension, which extends across the rear of the existing property and part of the proposed extension. And this is the rear elevation of the garage proposed. The floor plan probably gives you a little more context of that, providing ground floor level is proposed in the single-storey here. This is the footprint of the two-storey element, and then the adjoining garage in this location. And this is the first floor. There's no actual net additional bedrooms. It's just a reordering at first floor level, and provide a dressing room to one of the existing bedrooms. So the principal development is acceptable. It's within the developed area. In terms of highway safety, parking space provision, these matters are considered to be acceptable. The garage provides a parking space, and 2 parking spaces are provided to the front of the site on the existing driveway, which is of sufficient amount of parking for the size of property. The impact on visual amenity is considered to be acceptable. The extensions are visually subservient. They are set back from the street scene and not obtrusive within the established character of the area. And in terms of the impact on residential amenity, again, the 2-storey property extensions set away from the shared boundary by about 2.5 metres. It mirrors a sort of flank elevation as much as possible of the neighbouring property, which is set away. It also has a large outbuilding on its boundary, and the single-storey elements are also considered to be acceptable by reason of their height and depth. And therefore, the application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions which are set out from page 73. Probably the notable condition there is condition 3 restricts the conversion of the garage without the need for planning permission. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Peter. Members, over to you.
If I can start now.
Yes.
Ward. The Town Council considered this question. They considered there was a degree of overdevelopment.
I'm so sorry, Councillor Williams. Could you just move the microphone towards you? Thank you very much.
I normally don't like microphones. Town Council considered there was overdevelopment and an adverse effect to the street scene. I've read the papers very carefully, and I'm still of that opinion, but of course I will listen very carefully to what my colleagues say. I think it's the double rear extension is the problem. That certainly reduces the view of the hill which is behind Overbrook, and which in my opinion is one of the features of that estate, because when you drive through, getting more towards the actual property, there is a nice view of the hill, and that will clearly be blocked to a degree. The original development in '67 was clearly an open plan development. And there is also the question of parking. I know in theory you can use the garage for the additional parking, but in actual practice that's most unlikely to happen. So I think there is a question of car parking. Has nothing whatsoever to do with what the Surrey County Council said on the impact to the main road. That's irrelevant. So I think we get back to the simple question. This is a slightly larger development than one would wish to see in the area. It will affect the street scene and it will affect the background scene, which again is one of the features of this particular estate. Thank you.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you. I appreciate what Councillor Williams has said, but I have to say I sort of profoundly disagree, really, that firstly, from a planning perspective, officers correct me if I'm wrong, that there is no right to a view. So we can't. I think it'd be very difficult to take that into perspective for any reason for objection. Not to mention, actually, this picture shows you can quite clearly see the hill over the top of the existing properties. What is being proposed is certainly not going to be any greater in height than the existing property, and the properties behind this actually are probably going to be no. The view will be no different, really, from the point of view of what you're looking at. So any sort of view of hillsides, I cannot see would be affected at all. I do know Overbrook reasonably well. I know that there has been some discussion about whether a site visit should be had, but I felt it was not necessary. We talk about parking being a problem. It seems as if members of this committee believe that there's going to be one car per bedroom on any properties. I have a 4-bedroom property and we have 2 cars, and I suspect that's far more normal. This is a 3-bedroom property, and I will suspect it will have a maximum of 2 cars. Yes, there is an outside possibility that there could be 3. Every now and again you do get that, but on balance, on average, I think it's not as bad as what many members of this council believe car ownership to be. I think with the view of the size of the extension, yes, this is probably a larger extension than other properties, but also this is a significantly larger plot than many of the others. It's a corner plot. I live in a road with a not too dissimilar layout to this, with not too dissimilar extensions having been done to it on corner plots such as this one. Actually, I thought this was a reasonably modest extension, making a very nice, I thought it was a reasonably attractive looking property. Nothing special, nothing awful. I'm entirely comfortable with supporting the officer's recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. If I could just say, as somebody who's considerably older than you, and I lived in a 5-bedroom house with 3 grown-up children, and there were 5 cars. And I think in a few years' time we might have this. If we could have this conversation again, you might find you've got more than 2. Anyway, Councillor James, please. Councillor Martin.
Thank you. Most of what I was going to say has already been said. I think it's a modest extension. I think the real damage was done in the previous dormer window application, which we refused and which was allowed on appeal. I think that really makes it ugly. But the application we've got for this extension is relatively modest, and I can't see what the fuss is about, and we should be supporting the officers on this.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I did make a site visit, which I found very helpful, particularly with Peter's very explicit description of everything, and I came away feeling that this was a most appropriate extension. There is a garage, there's going to still be a garage, and I really don't see any problems on this occasion, Councillor Martin, with parking or the number of vehicles. You see how open-minded I am.
Thank you. Members, are there any other comments? So we move on to the recommendation. And the recommendation is that permission be granted subject to conditions 1 to 3 and an informative as set out on pages 73 and 74 of the agenda. May I have those in favour of the recommendation to grant permission?
Ten in favour.
Those against?
1 against.
And abstentions? Thank you, members. Permission is granted. And before you go, you may know already, but if you don't, today is the last meeting that we're going to be honoured with the presence of Barry. Barry is leaving us for another authority. I can't think why. We're such a nice lot, but there we go. We wish you all the very... And no, and he's been so helpful. Thank you for all your help, Barry, that you've given to me and to the committee, and wish you the very best of luck in the future. Thank you.